Welcome to World City, the global forum for urban innovation, where bold minds gather to share the best insights and ideas about cities from all corners of the globe. At World City, we've made it our mission to flip ideas on their heads, to take unconventional approaches that shape cities that are livable, lovable, and prosperous. Here, we spark conversations and connections that provoke and inspire. We share the best ideas about cities from some of the best cities in the world.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Fair. I'm the President of Resonance and founder of World City. Welcome to our 4th edition of this event. We started World City in 2020 as a spontaneous response to the pandemic. As we were all locked up, sitting in our living rooms, at our kitchen tables, looking at what was going to come next, we saw this as an opportunity to perhaps make lemonade out of lemons and connect people around the world to have a conversation about the future of our cities, to break down barriers between geography, countries, cities, and between disciplines, whether you were in architecture, design, planning, economic development, destination marketing, culture, sustainability. In that first event, we brought together 5,000 people from around the world onto that virtual platform. We did it 24 hours a day for 3 days straight. So this is what happens when you put a bunch of consultants like us into a room. You come up with a perfect solution and no idea how to execute. We're not event managers, so we learned from that experience. And now World City, fast forward here to our 4th edition, is a hybrid event that has both an in-person audience here at the Times Center in New York and a global audience participating virtually online on the platform. I would encourage all of you that are here in person to download the app from Apple or Google Play. There's a link, a QR code on the back of your name tag that will take you to the Apple Store. And that'll allow you to also log in and participate in the chat with our virtual participants who are joining us from more than 50 different countries and 250 cities around the world. So here we are now in 2023, and we can see that World City truly has become not just another event, but a global community, and that was our ambition. If you heard from Tobias in our Future Lab workshop this morning, he talked about Stockholm, and he talked about the islands. And what really connected Stockholm together and made it work were the bridges. And he encouraged all of you to build bridges. And that's really what World City is all about, is creating those connections and building those bridges between geography and disciplines. We've put together a stellar lineup of speakers here for this forum that will be here on stage in New York and also participating virtually online. There'll be sessions starting this evening at 8 p.m. on our world stage that will be going around the world with speakers from Bogota, from Barcelona, from Sydney, and many other cities and places in between. They'll also be running tomorrow during the lunch break. For those of you here, you have the opportunity to participate in roundtable discussions, and I encourage you to sign up for those if you haven't done so already. And you'll also be able to then play on demand any session after it airs, whether you're here in New York or participating virtually online. Of course, some of the most interesting content will be what happens offstage, and that's really in the conversations and the connections between all of you. You know, unlike many industry or association conferences, you probably don't know a lot of people here at World City, and that's exactly the idea, to force those collisions and those conversations. We've designed World City really to create a space for that dialogue where opportunities, connections, possibilities can flourish. If you can't tell already, we're relentless optimists at Resonance, and I suspect if you're here, you probably are too. We'll talk about livability. We'll talk about prosperity. We'll talk about sustainability and we'll talk about resiliency in the sessions to come. But that's really just the start. We've asked our speakers joining us today to really try and flip the script, to think about unconventional ideas and challenge our thinking around some of these notions, and to think about what comes after what comes next. In our own work at Resonance with countries, cities, developers over the last year around the world, we've seen our conversation and our work literally flip itself from focusing over the last couple of years on recovery of places to now thinking about the reinvention of them, whether they're destinations, cities, communities, or developments. While many aspects of our lives, cities, and our economies have returned to their pre-pandemic form, there are some significant changes that are underway, that are fundamental, that will affect how we live and will shape our cities for years to come. I'm going to share with you just 5 key shifts that we see that have informed our thinking as we prepared the program and selected speakers for this year's World City 2023. The first I'll touch on is so much of what we've done and thought about, at least over my career over the last 20 years, has been around globalization. And globalization has really changed many of our countries' economies and advanced countries. You can see that, over time, the share of manufacturing in many Western countries and advanced economies had declined. By 2021, in the United States, for example, manufacturing made up only 11% of our economy and accounted for only 8% of employment. And you can see that trend reflected in many other different countries. And this is the result and the effect of globalization as we centered production of many goods in lower cost countries. But that's all about to change. We are entering a period of profound reindustrialization in advanced economies as we think about some of the effects of the war in Ukraine making trade political, or we think about and we look at sensitive technologies and the reshoring of chip production here in the United States and other Western countries. This reindustrialization is creating new opportunities and new challenges for our cities. The manufacturers of green technology, whether those are windmills, solar panels, or we think about the materials used to create them, these companies are not leasing out Class A office space here in Manhattan or in the city in London. They're creating large-scale footprint operations in suburban areas in these metropolitan regions or in smaller cities that had been lost in the tech boom and the growth of the services economy. So this has profound implications for as we think about the future of urbanism in some of our advanced countries. The second big trend is something that we've talked a lot about, probably more than anything else since we last met here on this stage a year ago, and that's artificial intelligence. Of course, there are many different views on artificial intelligence. We'll hear about some of them tomorrow. We have a great debate on what AI means for the future of architecture and design, so don't miss that here on stage tomorrow. But what I want to focus on now first is really thinking about AI and how this could spawn a new era in automation that may be an answer to one of the most profound problems heading for our cities in the very near future. As we think about urbanization and this meta theme and the story about the growth of cities and the urbanization and how many people are moving into cities, this is true, but it's not true across all cities. In fact, it's really a tale of 2 different types of cities as we look at cities in the global north versus the global south. For many cities and advanced economies in the global north, population growth is actually forecast to slow. In some cities, in fact, it is already in decline. In the most extreme example, we can look at Tokyo, currently the largest city in the world in terms of population today, and it's forecast to lose 10 million people by the end of this century. And even in cities like Toronto, New York, Los Angeles, that population growth will slow. But that's not the whole story. Underneath slowing population growth is also a change in the demographics of the people within these cities as the populations become older and we see our workforce actually start to shrink. So population growth slowing, workforce getting older. The question is, for these cities, the top 100 cities in terms of size in the world today, they represent 11% of the population, but they power 20% of the global economy. Will these cities with slowing population growth and aging population still be able to power the global economy? This is where we think about AI leading to a new era in automation. And while some in the most extreme view, we look at AI as an existential threat to the future of humanity, there is also an opportunity to flip that thinking on its head and think about AI spawning a new era in automation that may be the key to maintaining the vibrancy and the prosperity of so many of these global cities. The third trend I want to focus on is just looking at centralization. Of course, during the pandemic, the idea of 15-minute cities was popularized as we all lived much more local lives. Even today, now, as we look at the end of 2022, our transit systems have not recovered. Will they ever go back to 100% to where they were in 2019? We are likely to see some recovery, but it seems that there's been a profound change and a shift in terms of how our urban economies are organized. And this really is about a trend and a shift from centralization of companies and centralization of economic activity in our cities to looking at a more localized approach. And that is the 15-minute concept of being able to have access to everything you want to live, work, play within 15-minute bike, walk, or transit ride from where you live. But of course, this has profound implications. And we've already talked, and we will dig into in talking about some of the effects this has had on our downtowns and our central business districts. But we can also flip that thinking upside down and think about how has that economic activity and that shift of what's lost in our downtowns and central business districts, what are the opportunities that that's creating in our suburban areas and more residential communities? Because that economic activity is not just a zero-sum game. It has the potential to create and spawn a new era in entrepreneurship and the creation of millions of new companies in areas that had very little economic activity in the past. The fourth shift that we're focusing on, and I think that many of you are dealing with in your own work, is looking at inequality within our cities. Inequality today in many Western countries is back to where it was in the 1920s, the so-called Gilded Age, as we look at the ratio between those in the top 10% having a larger and larger share of the income. In fact, in the United States, Italy, Japan, the top 10% of income earners now receive almost 50% of all the income generated in those countries. And the income inequality can be even more severe and pronounced within particular cities. Here in the US, the problem is particularly pronounced as we look at Los Angeles and New York and the difference in income inequality versus other global cities around the world. So what does this mean for cities? Why is income inequality important? Is that if we don't deal with this, we'll never move towards more inclusive cities. And what does inclusion mean? We need to think not just about redistribution through taxation, but really looking at policy around the pre-distribution. How do we create more economic opportunities for more people to participate in? How do we create training and skills for the next generation workforce that we'll need to power this new economy? And lastly, I'll touch on, which we can't not talk about, climate change. You know, look at just here in New York, the effects of the flooding that happened on Friday. We're seeing more and more extreme weather events, and of course, this has created a call to action stronger than ever as it relates to the decarbonization of our cities. That decarbonization movement is starting to have an effect. We're starting to bend the curve, at least stopping the growth in emissions in many of our global cities. Paris doing a better job than most. We're starting to see some real differences in decreasing the carbon footprint of their particular city. But decarbonization is just the start. What if we thought about going beyond just being net zero? What if we thought about actually going and being net positive? And what if we went beyond thinking about net positive and actually thinking about how cities could be a force for regeneration? Could a regenerative city actually increase the biodiversity of a city? Can it be net positive in terms of the energy it creates? In a regenerative city, we would look at how we create prosperity that lifts up many people within the city while reducing income inequality. As you can see, we definitely have an optimistic view of what the future could look like, but we stand here and have organized and brought speakers together that, yes, we want to tackle some of the issues, but we want to be aspirational in our thinking and our thoughts for the future.